Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed. The Israeli Prime Minister's former media advisor, Nir Hefetz, has turned state witness against him in the corruption case 4000, and now he's supposedly providing the police with incriminating evidence against no less than 4 Likud members, 2 of which are sitting ministers. ILTV's Aaron Porce joins us in the studio with more on this story. So, Aaron, what evidence is Hefetz offering?
So neither the exact details of the evidence that he's offered nor the names of the 4 Likud members against which this evidence is supposedly enlightening have been released. So that's all under wraps right now. But according to Ynet News that reported this morning, Hefetz has released evidence that will discuss, deals, backroom deals with conflicts of interest, official misconduct, things regarding to healthcare, real estate, and more.
And more, right. Now, Hefetz is the 3rd suspect to turn state's witness, and now he's offering up this extra information. What is Netanyahu's response? Well,
again, there's a gag order. Netanyahu's not really responding to any specific anything, but he is continuing to say, as he's always said, that there is nothing, there will be nothing because there is nothing. He's denying any wrongdoing. He even actually went so far as to mock some of the investigations against him just yesterday while speaking in Washington. We can take a look at the exchange.
Is this job as exciting as you once thought? And what's the pleasure of being prime minister?
Oh, investigations.
So again, all joking aside, Netanyahu has continued to blast all 4 corruption charges against him, saying they're a witch hunt.
Yeah.
On a side note, though, the deeper the investigations go, the more his support for the Likud party goes as well. So it's kind of this weird inverse relationship there.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu finally met with U.S. President Donald Trump yesterday afternoon. But according to the Israeli leader, less than 1/4 of their meeting was devoted to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Netanyahu says the Trump administration hasn't yet showed him its much-anticipated peace plan, which White House officials claim they are close to finalizing.
Well, we're going to see. We're working on it very hard, and we'd like to. Look, it would be a great achievement, and even from a humanitarian standpoint, what better if we could make peace between Israel and the Palestinians? And I can tell you, we are working very hard on doing that. And I think we have a very good chance. And the biggest difficulty that anybody's had, you look over 25 years, nobody could get past, number 1, Jerusalem. They couldn't get past it. We've taken it off the table.
Right now, there is no timetable as to when the plan will be released to the public, and Netanyahu himself has not said whether or not he will support the emergence of a Palestinian state as part of it. The Israeli leader does say he supports the right to the Palestinians having the power of government as long as it doesn't threaten Israel. The Palestinians are refusing to accept the United States as a leader in negotiations, however, claiming the country revealed its bias after Trump recognized Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel. The U.S. president still seems to think the White House has control.
The Palestinians, I think, are wanting to come back to the table very badly. If they don't, you don't have peace. You don't have peace. If they don't, you don't have peace, and that's a possibility also.
The Israeli Prime Minister has also just officially given his speech to AIPAC, praising Israel's, quote, beautiful relationship with the United States. Netanyahu is slamming the Palestinian Authority for paying stipends to jailed terrorists, claiming that peace will never come until the Palestinians stop, quote, funding death. Iran took center stage in the Prime Minister's speech, with Netanyahu vowing not to let the country ever develop nuclear weapons.
Last week we read in the book of Esther about an earlier Persian attempt to exterminate our people. They failed then, they'll fail now. We will never let Iran develop nuclear weapons. Not now, not in 10 years, not ever.
There are just 60 days left until the Trump-imposed deadline to unilaterally make changes to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, an accord which Netanyahu vehemently opposes. An Iranian nuclear energy official is now warning that Iran will be able to create highly enriched uranium in less than 48 hours if the United States does in fact drop out of the deal. Now, while much of Netanyahu's speech focused on the threats facing the Jewish state, he did celebrate some of Israel's achievements over the course of the last year. Netanyahu claims Israel has foiled dozens of global terror attacks and is successfully combating the boycott movement by forging new international relations. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's trip to the U.S. this week is going on as scheduled, and Netanyahu has just finished a series of meetings with top lawmakers from both sides of the aisle. This comes following his meeting with President Trump and his speech last night to AIPAC, where Netanyahu continued to thank President Trump for his recent decisions regarding Jerusalem and blast Iran for continuous aggressions in the Middle East.
Iran is building an aggressive empire. Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen, more to come. Now Iran is seeking to build permanent military bases in Syria, seeking to create a land bridge from Tartus, from Tehran to Tartus on the Mediterranean, and in addition to moving its army, its air force, its navy to Syria, to be able to attack Israel from closer hand, it's also seeking to develop, to build precision-guided missile factories in Syria, in Lebanon, against Israel. I will not let that happen.
The Prime Minister even presented Republican Senator Steve Scalise with an IDF paratroopers hat as a sign of appreciation for his support for the Jewish state. Now, in addition to Iran's expanding reach in the Middle East, Netanyahu has also called attention to the JCPOA nuclear agreement between Iran and the P5+1 powers, saying Israel supports the U.S.'s stance on either fixing or nixing the deal. As for peace negotiations with the Palestinians, well, Netanyahu's focus has remained positive despite a major political fallout since the White House's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's undivided capital.
Israel remains committed to achieving peace with all our neighbors, including the Palestinians. President Trump has made it clear that he is committed to peace. I have made it clear that I'm committed to peace. We appreciate the efforts of President Trump's superb team, Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, and Ambassador David Friedman. Thank you all. Thank you all for your hard work for peace. But to get peace, President Abbas has to embrace peace and to stop supporting terror.
The Central American country of Guatemala has made a historical choice and will be moving its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem just 2 days after the U.S. Embassy is set to make the very same move.
Esta es una decisión soberana y como decisión soberana reconocemos a Jerusalén como la capital de Israel. En mayo de este año se celebra el 70 aniversario de la creación del Estado de Israel y hemos instruido que 2 días después de que los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica traslade su embajada, Guatemala regrese y traslade permanentemente su embajada a Jerusalén.
Guatemala was one of only a handful of countries that backed U.S. President Donald Trump when he made his decision back in December to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and move the U.S. embassy to the city. The international community does not recognize Israeli sovereignty over the entirety of Jerusalem, and the Palestinians want East Jerusalem as a capital of their future state. But despite the international backlash, Guatemala has stayed loyal to the United States and will be moving its own embassy as a nod of support for Trump. The United States provides important financial aid to Guatemala, and the U.S. president has threatened to cut off aid to countries that support the UN resolution condemning his Jerusalem announcement. Before 1980, Guatemala actually had an embassy in Jerusalem, along with a dozen other countries, but after Israel passed a law proclaiming Jerusalem as its indivisible and eternal capital, the UN Security Council called on Guatemala to move its embassy to Tel Aviv. The Guatemalan leader Morales says a decision to move the embassy back to Jerusalem isn't only a show of support for the United States, but also for Israel.
Un honor y es lo correcto.
It is an honor and it is the right thing to do. Well, thank you. Thank you, friend.
Morales maintains an important base of conservative Christian support in his country, but has faced threats of impeachment for corruption. 3 Israeli men have reportedly been injured in a suspected car ramming attack in the Israeli city of Akko, and the assailant has allegedly been shot and neutralized. The driver first struck a policeman near the Akko market and then continued driving to the Akko train station, where he hit 2 Israeli soldiers. Magen David Adom paramedics rushed the 2 20-year-old victims to the hospital, along with a policeman, but luckily all of their injuries are light. In other news, IDF soldiers shot and killed a Gaza resident over the weekend after the man failed to halt while entering a restricted area. According to Army spokespeople, soldiers reportedly fired into the air when the suspect refused to stop, but when that had no effect, they fired at him. The suspect, who, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, was a farmer on his own land, ran away from the shots but was later pronounced dead at the Khan Yunis hospital. IDF forces have just erected a guard tower at the Damascus Gate in the Muslim quarter of Jerusalem's Old City. This is now the 4th guard position at the gate, and while Israeli officials say there are many security reasons that necessitate the tower, Muslims see the new station as yet another sign of oppression. ILTV's Aaron Porras has the details. Hi, Aaron.
Thank you very much, Natasha. And yeah, you're exactly right. The Muslim and Palestinian officials are looking at this as yet another obstruction of their freedom of movement, another attack on the status quo on Al-Aqsa and the Temple Mount. Israeli officials are continuing to be adamant, saying the exact opposite, though, that it couldn't be further from the truth. It's just a response to terror attacks. In fact, you can listen to Police Chief Rosenfeld saying that exactly himself.
We know that here there are going to be terrorist attacks, and we know there are going to be future terrorist attacks. Whatever amount of security is necessary needs to be implemented here.
Now, this reminds me of back in July when Israel implemented cameras and metal detectors, and there was a huge uproar, right?
Yeah, and you'd be right to think that because, that was a response to an attack in July that actually left 2 officers dead on the Temple Mount. And this is in response to attacks and a rise in violence since Trump made his Jerusalem decision in December. So, I mean, we're really just waiting to see kind of what happens. But in July, I mean, what the riots resulted in removing those measures in the end. So we'll see what happens.
Well, there haven't been any riots right now, so let's just wait and hope that nothing takes place. Thanks for joining us. The Knesset has just passed a controversial new law that will allow the Israeli police to withhold the bodies of Palestinian terrorists and use them as bargaining chips. District police commanders will now be able to determine whether or not to release a terrorist's body for burial. If there is fear that the funeral could be used to promote further incitement, praise terror, or be used to carry out another attack, Israeli officials will be able to hold onto the body until further notice. Israeli Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan says the law is disagreeable but necessary, since many past funerals have featured incitement for further attacks against Israel. The passing of this new law comes in response to outrage from the families of 4 Israelis who are currently being held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The terror organization refuses to hand over the bodies of 2 IDF soldiers who were killed in battle and another 2 mentally ill Israelis who crossed into the Strip on their own accord. Israeli security forces have been trying to negotiate their return, regularly taking custody of terrorists' bodies as bargaining chips, but ultimately returning them. New reports from Hamas and several other groups in the Gaza Strip are again warning of an impending humanitarian crisis in the coastal enclave. ILTV's Aaron Porras has more on this story. Now, Aaron, what exactly does Hamas want to be done right now to solve this crisis?
They want a lot. They want the United States to reinstate, funding. They want Israel and Egypt to lift their blockades. They want the Palestinian Authority to lift their sanctions, especially the Palestinian Authority, where they're placing most of their blame right now because they've refused to lift the sanctions, on their electricity access and things like that, despite Hamas coming to the negotiating table. Well,
which is interesting because Hamas did admit that the sanctions were to bring Hamas to the negotiating table, which they have done. What are the responses, the Palestinian public's responses to where Hamas is shifting the blame?
Sure. Well, the Palestinian Authority is basically still saying, we're just still working on the deal, so nothing is set in stone yet,
right.
Which is actually why it's possible that they haven't lifted the sanctions yet. It's kind of this continuing incentive.
Got it.
As from Israel's perspective, at least in the Southern Command, the IDF has already stated that they're not really buying it anyway. They think that Hamas is really just using the humanitarian crisis and weekly protests on the border, on the Gaza border, as kind of a smokescreen to draw attention away from their terror activities.
Well, I mean, it's very, very harsh to see what's happening. We have over 40% of people unemployed in the Gaza Strip. How did Israel come to that conclusion, though, that is what Hamas's goal is?
Primarily because Israel offered help. They offered to aid and lift some of the sanctions and some of the blockade that they have imposed on Gaza in return for Hamas returning, 2 bodies of soldiers that were stolen in 2014 summer war, and 2 live captives that they've been holding on to now for over a few years. So they refused that outright. They'd said the only way we'll even begin to talk about returning these 4 individuals is if Israel releases, a mass of indicted criminals from prison, which Israel is just not willing to do.
Well, I mean, I think the world as a whole, Israel also is very, very worried about what a collapse would look like in the Gaza Strip.
It would be disastrous. Everybody knows that, yeah.
All right, thanks for joining us, Aaron. All right, well, Poland and Israeli officials met on Thursday to address their diplomatic rift over a new Polish law that makes it a crime to blame Poland for the Holocaust. The law was adopted last month, eliciting outrage from the Israeli government, which claims that Poland is trying to rewrite history and deny its involvement in the Holocaust.
It is no secret that the issue of the Polish legislation with regard to the Holocaust is a matter of concern to Israel and to the Jewish people worldwide. We must make sure that historical truths are preserved, that there will be no restriction on the freedom of research and speech, and that the widespread of criminalization in this regard is addressed and resolved.
After weeks of back and forth barbs, a Polish delegation came to Jerusalem to meet with Israeli officials and discuss the matter. The meeting comes just a week after a group of Poles who risked their lives to save Jews called for a dialogue between the 2 governments.
We are committed to join our efforts to promote truth about the Holocaust and the Polish-Jewish centuries-old relationship. We are here, open and ready to answer all the questions and clarify whatever is left to be clarified with regard to the anti-defamation law recently amended in Poland.
The diplomats met for more than 3 hours, but the talks were inconclusive. Israel says it is especially concerned about Poland's plan to criminalize those who speak about Poland's role in the Holocaust, saying it's an obstacle to open historical debate. All right, guys, that's it. The Jewish holiday of Purim has finally wrapped up here in Israel, but the city is still vibrating from a weekend of festivities. Thousands of Israelis paraded through the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, dressed in costumes to celebrate the Jewish salvation from genocide in ancient Persia.
This is a Purim holiday in Israel. It's a very fun day. We wear customs, we have a holiday, so we spend time with the kids, with the families, and celebration in the streets. Very fun. It's a very good time to be in Israel.
The festivities began last Wednesday and ended on Thursday, but continued throughout the weekend. And while Purim isn't largely celebrated abroad, even the Jewish Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg joined in on the celebrations. On Friday, Zuckerberg posted a picture of him and his wife baking hamantashen, the traditional Jewish dessert for the holiday. When asked what the pastries were, Zuckerberg responded, Haman was the villain of Purim, and he famously had a 3-cornered hat. These pastries symbolized the victory over him. Well, Zuckerberg was just one of the tens of thousands of Jews stuffing themselves with the sweet pastry. In fact, Israeli bakeries are still full of the tasty snack. At least there's one thing that remains of the holiday, well, that and everybody's hangovers, since it's considered a mitzvah or a good deed to drink on Purim. Now it is time for our top 5 with ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh.
People around the world say they can sniff out a true Tel Avivian from miles away. Maybe something about our personalities or the way that we dress, but either way, here are the top 5 signs of knowing you've been living in Tel Aviv for way too long. Number 1 on our list are bikes. If you live in Tel Aviv, there's close to no chance you have a car for 2 reasons. 1 being the lack of parking, and 2 being the fact that Tel Avivians rarely leave the city. So whether an electric bike, a regular one, a scooter, or a skateboard, Tel Avivians are constantly rolling around the city. And number 2, come to Tel Aviv and introduce me to one Tel Avivian that doesn't know at least one barista, bartender, or kiosk cashier on a first-name basis. I dare you. You know you're a true Tel Avivian when you walk to a bar with a line out the door, you gave one look to a guy at the front, and there you have it. You've cut the whole line and most likely got a free drink. That's just how it's done. Number 3 is a little dramatic but very understandable. The idea of walking through the shuk on a Friday afternoon sounds less preferable to a Tel Avivian than walking through an episode of Game of Thrones. Minus the winter part. The shuk on a Friday is the perfect place to grab some weekly groceries, a bite to eat, and a beer if you can handle all the balagan. Good luck. 4th on our list is a PSA, people, public service announcement. Tel Avivians have this thing where they feel completely comfortable and find it very appropriate leaving a loud WhatsApp voice message in a quiet waiting room or elevator. The thought of shooting a text, I guess, just never crosses our minds, and when I say ours, I mean mine as well, because I'm pretty sure I just did it on the elevator ride up here. Number 5 is my favorite part, but also my worst nightmare when it comes to summers in this city. You most definitely know you're a true Tel Avivian if your feet have become immune to the sand. Not just regular old sand, the hot, scorching sand that seemingly doesn't affect the feet of true locals. Oh, and on the topic of sand, it's almost as if our apartments look better with the sandy post-beach trip decor. A Tel Aviv apartment looks almost weird without some sand here and there. That's all for today's Top 5. Back to you.
That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.